who are just joining us for the first time, we're pleased to have you with us. Today, while our ranks still look a little light, I will be doing a roll call. I'm not going to be asking staff that are representing their agency directors to identify themselves. You're more than welcome to participate in the meeting on behalf of your agency, and you can introduce yourself if you decide to speak. So we also do have some guest speakers with us, so we'll introduce them as they come on. Amy, did you want to give people a quick reminder of how to use WebEx, or should we just go to the agenda?
I think we can go to the agenda. If anyone has any questions or runs into any problems with WebEx, this slide is posted in the slide deck that's on the meeting webpage. So feel free to reference it if you'd like.
Great, thank you. So just briefly, if you can go to the next slide, today we hope to hear from DEQ on a couple of agenda items. They have just kicked off rulemaking for the climate protection program. So we're going to hear about that, and also an update on the grant application that DEQ and other agencies completed and submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency. We had invited Representative Marsh and Senator Lieber to join us, but we may have gotten our wires crossed on that. So we may need to do a little reorganizing of our agenda. We will be hearing from Director Stolfi and Director Bell, who are their agencies are new to the commission, just starting in January, and we've asked them to just give a really brief overview about how their work and their agency's work intersects with climate action. So looking forward to hearing from them.
Kathy, can I stop you for just one moment? I'm sorry to interrupt. Abby, could you go back one slide? Thank you. There
Thanks.
you go.
Thank you. Then we'll also hear a little bit from Amy, who worked to try and collect some of the opportunities for providing input to agencies on their budget priorities for this next year. We'll have a discussion on topics that commissioners would like to see us take up at future meeting agendas, and then we'll do some public comments. So Amy, I don't see Representative Marsh, so I'm thinking that maybe we did get our wires crossed.
Well, we didn't ask her to start until 1:25, so she just might not be on the meeting yet.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, well then we can go ahead and I'll do roll call, and then we'll go to Colin McConaughey to hear about the grant application.
Great.
So with that, let's go to the roll call, and I'm going to start with the voting commissioners and then go to legislators and then to the agency directors. And again, if you're representing your agency's director, I'm not going to call out any other names, but just to make this a little more manageable. Commissioner Apter.
Here, good afternoon all.
Good afternoon. Commissioner Ford. Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Ross.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Welcome. Commissioner Sheeran. Commissioner Shippentauer. Representative Helm. Good to have you with us. Thank you. Representative Levy. Senator Brock Smith. Senator Dembro. Director Bateman.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Welcome. Director Leslie. Commissioner Deck. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, my name is Shannon Ryan. I am here on behalf of Director Leslie. Thank you.
Commissioner Decker. Director Felden.
This is Colin McConaughey filling in for Director Felden.
Thank you. Director Sharpillas Hansen.
Good afternoon, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome. State Forester Mukomoto.
Here, this is Cal.
Welcome. Director Soforan. Director Stolfi will be joining us a little bit later in the meeting. Director Bell, are you on yet? Or you'll be joining us a little later as well?
This is Dan Elliott, Chair McDonald with Oregon Housing. Director Bell be here with bells on a little later.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Director Strickler.
Susan Peitzman on behalf of Director Strickler.
Director Woodcock.
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Acting Director Palmieri.
Present.
Acting Director Page.
I'm here. Good afternoon from the Connect conference in Central Oregon.
Welcome. Excellent. Directors Benner and Hothy let us know that they were not going to be able to join us today. So they are excused. So welcome. Colin, are you ready to present?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you very much.
Oh, great. Yes, thank you, Chair McDonald. Members of the commission, my name is Colin McConaughey. I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality, and here just real briefly, since we've been on this general topic with the commission a couple of times already in recent months, but here I wanted to share out these submittal of what we're calling Oregon's Climate Equity and Resilience Through Action, or CERTA, grant application to the US EPA. This is the application to implement the actions that we identified in our Priority Climate Action Plan. That is something we presented to the commission at your last meeting, and it is a submittal that EPA requires of states under their Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. The CPRG, Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, is a part of the 2022 federal legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and it identifies, it provides funding to EPA to then subaward to states and local governments and tribal governments funds both to develop plans like that Priority Climate Action Plan, as well as significant funds, about $4.5 billion nationally, to implement measures identified in those plans. And so that is what we have just done. That is what this application that we are again referring to as Oregon's Climate Equity and Resilience Through Action grant application is for. It is to compete for a portion of those of the $4.5 billion to implement the climate mitigation, the greenhouse gas reduction measures that we identified in our Priority Climate Action Plan that we presented on to this commission at your prior meeting. And if we could go to the next slide. So wanted to share and maybe partly remind this commission the approach that Oregon agencies took. DEQ has been in the lead, but really, I would say, in a coordination role to coordinate across state agencies and local governments, tribal governments in Oregon to develop that priority climate action plan that then directly informed this application that we submitted. The approach we took was really to be as responsive as possible to what EPA has said are their federal priorities for these funds. So I want to emphasize that what we've applied for, we think are competitive and very important actions for the state of Oregon and communities across our state. But I want to emphasize that what made it into our application were the measures that we thought were most responsive to the EPA's priorities. So not necessarily entirely reflective of all the priorities that we have here in the state of Oregon. But I will say, I should say, what we produced were measures that prioritized greenhouse gas reduction measures in the state that are ready to go, that are shovel ready, so to speak, can deliver on near-term emission reductions and benefits to communities across the state, with a prioritization for those actions that benefit our most disadvantaged communities in the state that are feeling the effects of climate change first and worst. These include, of course, our low-income communities, our rural communities, our tribal communities, and others across the state, and line up well with EPA's priorities for the climate pollution reduction grant program that they're running. The process to develop that plan that informed this application was, I would say, extensive, but it also very rapid to meet the timeline of EPA's. We worked with many different state agencies, local jurisdictions, and tribes to create and to identify these priority measures that went into our application, and ultimately arrived at measures that span across 5 different state agencies and directly involve many local jurisdictions throughout the state as well. Go to the next slide. So I won't go through this whole slide. There's a lot there, but I just want to use this to highlight again, we talked to the commission previously about the 3 focus areas that we identified. Those being actions and measures, again, that are pretty much ready to go or very imminently ready to go, that we can put. The EPA really wants to see these federal dollars, these implementation dollars, put to use quickly to deliver near-term benefits, near-term emission reductions. And we identified opportunities in 3 areas for Oregon that really met that criteria. That shovel readiness proved to be really a screen for us that ended up sifting out a lot of other otherwise really exciting good ideas and prospects down the road. And those 3 areas where we identified those near-term measures shook out into waste and materials, our buildings, and our transportation sectors. And since we went through this quite a bit more at the last commission meeting, I won't dive into each of these measures, but they are listed here. We did talk through this previously, but just want to say that all of those measures that we discussed previously did go into our application for now. And so those that were identified in the Priority Climate Action Plan translated into the application that we submitted. I should say we submitted that at the very end of last month. It was due April 1st. Next slide. Okay, this is just a roll-up of those measures, wanting to highlight both the emission reduction measures that cumulatively are our estimate of what will be achieved if we are able to successfully fund and implement those measures with this grant application. And it's, I would say to my eye, this is really exciting and significant for Oregon, looking at well over 6 million tons of CO2 equivalent reduction across those 3 areas that I just mentioned. And right there in the middle, at the bottom row, you can see the total amount that we have applied to EPA for is just under $200 million. So a really significant amount of funding potentially, we hope, that will come to Oregon to implement these measures. And also, I think really important for us and for EPA are the the effectiveness, the efficiency with which we can put those dollars to work. And that's what you see there on the right hand two columns. Of course, as you'd expect, these being the cost per ton of emissions reduced. And when we look out over just that near term, just the next about 5 years, the cost per ton of production, as you would expect, is higher, about $159 than per ton than when you look out over the entirety of the effect of these measures out through 2050, where we think we have a pretty darn competitive emission reduction or cost per ton of abatement there. It's sitting at on average $30 per ton. And Amy, is there one more slide? Did you add another slide at the end of this for us to conclude on, or just leave up for questions?
Yes, there is another slide. It's put in there mostly for the commission's reference. If you'd like to go back and see how much money we've requested and what our estimated emissions reductions are for each of the individual measures in our application, please feel free to reference this slide.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. And again, since we walked through this in some detail last time, I've glossed over, and I think we just had 10 minutes for this, so I should probably leave it there, Kathy. I don't want to take any more of your agenda, but I don't know if you want to pause for if there were questions or just roll on into the next agenda item.
When do you anticipate hearing from back from EPA? Did they give you any kind of a window of time?
They did, yes. Fortunately, I would say they're holding themselves to a similarly aggressive timeline as they've held the rest of us up to this point. They intend to get back this summer to applicants and with an initial determination of who's going to get what. I don't know if we know the month. Amy, was there? Did they say? I feel like they did say a month. It was either June or July.
I believe they said June or July, but that it wasn't 100% definite.
Yeah. They're not holding themselves to a date certain like they did the rest of us. Of course, they have to give us all a specific deadline. They haven't given us a date, but a time frame. Yes, Chair.
I know how hard staff have been working on this, so congratulations on getting it done. I'm sure that was a big weight off your shoulders, and it's really exciting to think about what might come from this grant application. It was one of the overarching recommendations that we had for the state as part of our roadmap of making sure that the state was positioning itself to take advantage of all the federal investments that are being made as part of a couple of bills that were recently passed. So it's great to see you doing just that, and exciting to see what we can do with the funding if we are fortunate enough to get one of these grants. So congratulations.
Thank you, Chair. And I should actually appreciate back to this commission your past work really put us in a much better position than we would have been otherwise to be responsive to the many different ways that EPA asked for reporting out on information and metrics. Have the work of this commission really did help inform and put us in a really competitive, I hope, position to respond to this solicitation.
That's great. That's good to hear. Thank you. Any other questions for Colin?
Yep, Chair McDonald, I have a question.
Great.
Want to just continue appreciating you all for the many hours of work that I know went into making this application as competitive as possible. I think the state should feel very proud of just what a robust and comprehensive proposal attuned to the requirements and parameters of this opportunity that ended up being submitted. So thank you again. I think I just wanted to ask a question around the competitiveness of this particular grant opportunity. I think I had heard that there were somewhere around $100 billion in total requests nationwide out of a $4.6 billion pot. Maybe that's off, but I think the point is there that was more funding requests submitted than there is funding available, which is, you know, typical for this kind of competitive opportunity, but maybe even more so for this particular pot. So my question is if you all see any opportunity or role for members of this commission or other interested stakeholders to help at this phase to increase the competitiveness of Oregon's application. I know many of us were, you know, working to do that prior to the application submission, but anything else that we can do at this phase?
That's a good question. Appreciate that, Commissioner Apter. I think even in post application, EPA will take receipt of letters of support. If organizations, if members of this commission and your organizations that you represent wish to provide a letter of support, you know, I don't know how much that affects or the EPA's decision, but they are certainly able to and are receiving those put in this post application phase. That is the only thing that really springs to my mind as far as opportunities at this juncture. You know, they're kind of, it's a lot like if anyone's familiar with how a job application process for public government it tends to work. Once the applications window is closed, the agency you know, is not able to receive more information from us, so they ask us questions and get clarification. There, it's what we sent is what they are going to consider outside of, again, letters of support, and I truly don't know how much that affects decision making there on their end.
I think it'd be great if we wrote a letter of support as the commission. Even if they can't officially consider it, it still would like to support what you guys have all done.
Yeah, Chair McDonald, I would greatly appreciate that. I mean, it can only help, right? At least I think.
Yeah. And is the grant application posted anywhere on DEQ's website?
It is, and we should have included a slide there with a link to that. I will follow up. We have a dedicated webpage on CPRG and now have a link to the full application as well as past information. Again, that priority climate action plan that directly informed this application. If you look at the two, you can really see that plan mirrored in our application. And I emphasize that in this presentation. We're pretty proud, frankly, of how we've run this process as far as being, again, responsive to EPA. We know better, I think, what our own priorities are, and there's a lot of overlap. Don't mistake that, but nonetheless, really designing this process in response to how EPA is running the climate pollution reduction grant program. And so you'll see that on the webpage. And Amy, as you know the link. I don't need to share that with you, so I don't know how you want to share that out to the commission.
I shared it out through the chat, and Nora shared it out as well.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you both.
Sorry, Commissioner Apter.
I just wanted to add one other comment, and I think maybe we're over time, but you know, while Kathy, or sorry, I completely agree. I would love to help support an additional letter on behalf of the commission into EPA in support of the state's application. While I know we're all eager and hopeful that the grant, you know, the maximum amount of funding will be approved for the proposed activities under the state's application, I would encourage us and the state agencies to consider, based on what does end up being approved, if there are, you know, because of all the great work you've already done, I would hate for that to go to waste. So if there are other federal opportunities that we can look out for, or, you know, as the state is shaping future budgets, if there is an opportunity to use this application and all of the great work that has gone into it to help guide future, either federal funding proposals or state funding decisions. I think just want to make sure that it continues to serve as a guiding proposal for future funding opportunities.
Thank you again, Colin, for presenting on this. And I will go ahead and work with staff to draft a letter. And Nora, if you'd like to review that and help with that, I'd love to have you join me in drafting a letter. So it'd be great. I also wanted to recognize that Commissioner Potowski is with us. Senator Dembro joined us. Senator Jackson. Now that's a nice addition. Commissioner Jackson, I believe has joined us. And if there are other commissioners who joined us a little late after we did the roll call, feel free to. Okay. Great. Well, thank you. And Representative Marsh, we're so honored to have you join us today and talk to us a little bit about the work that you co-led with Senator Lieber, focusing in on the resilient and efficient building sector task force that you both co-led. And then kind of any thoughts you want to share on legislation that's come out of that and any priorities you see for the coming session.
Thank you. Can you all hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Okay. I don't have a PowerPoint, so, but somebody else has a PowerPoint. That's great.
I think.
Okay. Well, there's the headline. This is really about the building sector and climate action as we put it together in the legislature. I want to first acknowledge the expertise that's in this virtual room, just seeing all of you, looking at your names, seeing my colleagues. This is really a center of power and action on climate issues. And I want to also invite you, because I see people who were involved in this building discussion, to interrupt, to augment, to correct me as we go along. It was very much a community-wide effort. And it also is an effort that started now 2 years ago. And I want to say in the lifetime of legislative initiatives, the tsunami of legislative directives, 2 years ago is a very long time ago. So I went back and reviewed material. And I'm hoping that others who are on the call will remember things that I can't remember anymore. So with that, I thought I would just give you an overview of what that work was, and we'll summarize the initiatives that came out of it and that were passed into law. First of all, I want to just take you back to the year 2021, which was a year before we started this work. That was a session where that we came into with a real rocky climate history. We'd had 2 sessions, 2019 and 2020, where we had tried to pass cap and invest programs. Those programs were not met with enthusiasm by many of our colleagues. There were walkouts. There was the end of session, and we set cap and trade aside. So we came into 2021 really trying to figure out where our climate victories could be. And fortunately for us, there was a group that had come together in the interim to put together the Clean Energy Opportunity Agenda. And we were able to move that during the 2021 session. That agenda really included 3 initiatives. One was House Bill 2021, which was our 100% clean electricity bill. The second was House Bill 2475, which allowed the state to implement differential rates for utility payers, recognizing that people who are lower income in a time of wildfire, which we'd experienced in 2020, in a time of increasing pressure from climate change on colder days and hotter days in the summer, were really continually stretching to pay their energy bills. So we passed House Bill 2475 to allow the utilities to, in a very objective way, to support low-income ratepayers with appropriate rates. And we passed House Bill 2842, which is known as our Healthy Homes Program. Tim Miller, if he's still on this call, saw the very beginning of that effort several years before we passed it, when we realized that we needed to start being able to put some money into maintaining the homes that are on the ground right now so that we can make critical repairs and then ready them for energy efficiency efforts. So that was the primary work in House in 2021. But there was also another effort that came along that wasn't quite as successful, and that was a proposal to allow local governments to implement their own REACH codes. So REACH codes, as probably everybody on this call knows, are in the building codes around energy efficiency. And what we proposed was to let local governments go beyond the state code in a fairly simplified way to impose stronger standards for energy efficiency in their buildings. Some people thought that bill would slide through. As it turned out, it was pretty controversial. We had a number of different entities standing up and raising questions with REACH code. So we set that aside, but we still knew that one of our next big initiatives really needed to be to take on the building sector. We know that buildings comprise about 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated. So there's a tremendous opportunity to look at buildings, both existing and buildings that may be here in the future, and to find energy efficiency efforts and materials efforts that would help people live in healthier, more supportive structures and go to work in healthier and more supportive structures. And that would save them money on the long term, especially in a time of changing climate. We knew as we looked at this buildings effort, that energy efficiency is really one of our low-hanging fruits in the energy world. And as we're looking at 100% clean electricity, we're trying to figure out how we're going to solve transmission problems and how we're going to go after siting issues, and how we are going to build more renewable facilities. And sometimes some of us forget that while those are really sexy, attractive, attention-getting efforts, that energy efficiency is actually, if you look regionally at the Northwest, energy efficiency is our biggest bang for the buck next to hydro. Over the last 20 years, we have saved an incredible, consumers have saved an incredible amount of money, and we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions simply by implementing energy efficiency efforts. So we knew that we wanted to look at buildings, and we wanted to look at them with a very strong focus on energy efficiency and making sure that we're doing everything possible that we can to make sure that we are building buildings in the way that makes most sense in a time when we understand that climate change is among us. So since we couldn't forward the REACH code, but we came back in the next short session, that was 2022, 2 years ago, almost exactly now when we started our first meeting, and we passed Senate Bill 1518. And what Senate Bill 1518 did was to put us on a pathway to really looking at the building sector. It established the Resilient Efficient Buildings Task Force, and it directed the task force, and I'm going to read the mission statement here, to identify and evaluate policies related to building codes and building decarbonization for new and existing buildings that would enable the state to meet the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that are in statute while maximizing additional benefits. The bill 1518 required us to put together a 27-member task force to do this work. And it gave us a little bit of money for us to be able to use to invest in consultants who could help us actually analyze some of the proposals that came forward. So we had the task force was chaired by Senator Kate Lieber, who was at that time chair of the Energy and Environment Committee on the Senate, and myself. I was serving as chair of Energy and Environment in the House. And we had two very able assistant co-chairs, Senator Finley, Representative Owens, both of whom are from Eastern Oregon. So it was, and since I'm from Southern Oregon, Senator Lieber is from Portland, we had a good geographical mix among all of us. And we also had a task force that was full of expertise. I pulled the list of members today just to reflect back, and it's pretty impressive. We had, in addition to legislators We had people representing environmental organizations, representing climate organizations, representing subcontractors, builders, nonprofit builders, the EJ community, local government, the universities, and on and on and on. Northwest Natural and PG&E representing the industries that could potentially be affected by this work. So it turned out to be a very diverse group. We held 16 online meetings with 27 members who were very active and good, excellent participants in the work. And we worked over the course of time from April 2 years ago until December of that time. And what we did was we started with really a process that had 4 different links in it. First, we wanted to simply build foundational understanding. We brought in experts to talk about buildings so that we could all start to understand what the issues were there and what the opportunities might be. We shared policy ideas. We had opportunities for everybody in the group to throw out their ideas, and we amassed a big list, which we later needed to cull and decide what we were going to focus in on. That was the process, the third effort, which was really to understand and prioritize policy. So we went through the master list and we identified things where we thought we had at least a majority of members. We were really working pretty carefully in this very diverse group to make sure that we had not full agreement on everything. That wasn't probably within the realm of possibility, but that certainly we had a consensus, or let's say at least a majority view for moving things forward. And then the fourth element of the process was really to model, to analyze all the proposals that had come forward and to measure support. We had consultants on board who would help us understand what the greenhouse gas emission impacts might be of any of the proposals that came forward, because we were really trying to ground this work in science and recognizing that multiple benefits are sometimes harder to represent in numbers and science, but we wanted to make sure that the ideas that were being forwarded were really foundational to doing good climate work, and that they had brought other benefits for people who would be impacted as well. So let me now just share with you a list of the ideas that we forwarded out of this group that really generated, I would say, pretty high levels of support among the 27 individuals. The first priority that we identified was to promote, incentivize, and/or subsidize energy efficiency and heating and cooling efficiency increases. Certainly, we understood that energy efficiency had been effective for us in the past. I think there was broad support among the group for really trying to pursue in an aggressive way energy efficiency, in particular for heating and cooling, because we understood that that was probably for many existing households the biggest opportunity available to us. Second priority, we agreed to promote, incentivize, and subsidize heat pumps. And you will see that reflected when we get to the what did we do in legislation part of this presentation. A third idea that generated significant support was to decarbonize institutional and public buildings. The fifth was to promote, incentivize, and/or subsidize air purification systems. And we're declining, but these proposals that I'm going to read to you all had a minimum of 18 out of 27 people indicating significant support. We said that we should assess and disclose material-related emissions. That is, in the building construction industry, we know that some materials, and this is evolving science, may be much more impactful in terms of reducing their long-term emissions. We said there was interest in modifying Energy Trust of Oregon's mission. This is perhaps still on our to-do list. It's not something we wound up pursuing. We saw significant support for building performance standards. We did forward that. Aligning energy efficiency programs with the state climate goals. Again, well supported. And finally, the last item that I will mention that got significant support was to enact energy efficient building codes. So we did not try with a 27-member panel and a diverse group to draft legislation out of that group. We realized that we did not have the time or the capacity to bring that group to a point where we would all agree on legislation. But it was very important to us that we got a very good temperature taking of that group after months and months of discussion and a lot of analysis of the items that really rose to the top that should be the gist for legislation that would come forward. And so with that, the input of that group, and let me say there is, for anyone who would like to dive in, there is a significant report that's still available. I've got a copy of it. I'm sure you can find it online. We can help you with that if you're interested. From the Joint Task Force on Resilient, Efficient Buildings. Thanks to our wonderful legislative policy analysts, we put all of this into one overriding document that describes in some detail the work that took place over many months. So we entered then the 2023 legislative session with a desire to memorialize many of the recommendations that had come forward from that group. And we did. The recommendations that we put forward and that passed into law wound up being contained in two different bills that were part of our climate resilience budget package. So they are packaged in with other initiatives as well. For efficiency's sake, we took a lot of climate initiatives and put them all together. And the bill numbers, for those of you who might be interested in looking them up, are House Bill 3630 and House Bill 3409. Again, we're talking from the 2023 legislative session. So now let me just give you the highlights of what you'll see contained in those bills, which are the outcome of the long task force process that we'd experienced. First, we established a state heat pump program. We know that heat pumps are invaluable to people, both as a climate response. The deaths that we saw in 2021 when we had the heat dome events, it didn't take more than that to help us understand that while Oregon might have been a place at one point where you don't need air conditioning, that is not the case in much of the state now. We also know that heat pumps are one of the most efficient ways that you can heat and cool your homes. And we knew that there was an opportunity there to really help people move from very inefficient baseboard electric heating in some cases to new efficient electric heat pumps. So we set up a very ambitious heat pump program. We said that by the year 2030, we expect there to be 500,000 heat pumps installed across the state of Oregon in both businesses and residential. Now that in other times, we might have just been scrambling for dollars to figure out how the heck we were going to help residents and businesses install 500,000 heat pumps. But a very important and very timely thing happened while we were in the process of our task force, and that is that the federal government stepped up and passed the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which brought and will bring millions of dollars to the work of energy efficiency and to consumer installation of appliances like electric heat pumps. That frankly made our work a lot easier, because at the point when the IRA passed, I stopped worrying about how we were going to pay for all the work that we were gearing up through the Building Resilience Task Force. And I started worrying more about how we were going to make sure that that federal money that was coming in really got out to Oregonians who want to use it. And so we passed some policies around that too, which I'll get to in a few minutes. So the state heat pump program basically empowers ODO, the Department of Energy. And I'm going to say many of the initiatives that we passed here are under the purview of the Department of Energy. It's sort of the Department of Energy's full employment program, although more is the Department of Energy's effort now to find people who can help them do all of this work. And Department of Energy, ODO, is charged with really managing the heat pump program, working with the multiple state agencies that may have a part in this. I see OHCS here. We could have DCBS involved. I mean, there's many, many agencies who may touch in some way the installation of heat pumps, the availability of those items. And the Department of Energy is charged with coordinating that effort. They are also charged with researching any kind of barriers to heat pump deployment, assessing the GHG impacts, because again, we want to make sure this work is rooted in science. So as we start to roll out the installation of what we expect to be mostly electric heat pumps, that we're actually calculating and those actions are having the expected outcomes that we want on the climate front. And they are in charge of reaching out to contractors and helping to train entities to both assess the need for heat pumps and to understand the technology and how to make installations. So we gave them a relatively small but $2 million training pot for information and training in that effort. The second big initiative that we took, also in the same set of bills, is to look at building code efficiency. And this is where we get to DCBS and our building codes people. I think Alana is on this call, so she's really the expert here. In Governor Brown's executive order on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, all of you remember that, they had set a standard for an increase in energy efficiency in our building codes of an increase of 60% by 2030. We thought, as we looked at that, certainly an executive order is a good thing, but we thought it would be a good idea to memorialize that in statute. And so we have now done that. We also charged DCBS for looking at any ways that they can identify for helping us to use their mission there in building codes to reduce emissions and move toward our state climate goals. A smaller assignment that we gave to DCBS was to ask them to report on low carbon building materials. So we don't have a mandate on low carbon building materials, but we know that there could be some potential here. And we want to be, so we took the recommendation from the task force and we are implementing that through a directive to the building codes to tell us about low carbon materials and to help us figure out whether that's something that we should pursue in the future. Our third initiative is that we gave ODO an assignment to establish a performance standards for commercial buildings. We know that commercial buildings are around 15 to 20% of our emissions. We believe that by setting good, again, based in science, energy efficiency expectations for commercial buildings, that we can have a significant effect on both how those buildings function. And again, we can contribute to our work to reduce emissions and achieve our carbon goals. So this is a complex program. ODO is working on it now. And I don't know if they're scheduled to come and talk to you about how it's unrolling. In essence, just to give you sort of the bird's eye look at this, we divided commercial buildings into tier 1 and what we call tier 2. Tier 1 buildings are the buildings of significant size, more than 35,000 in square feet, not counting the parking garages. Tier 2 are the smaller, under 20 to 35,000 square foot buildings, with some exceptions. These are all commercial buildings, not residential buildings. ODO is assigned with the tier 1 people for developing a program that will set out our energy efficiency expectations for those buildings. We will be partnering with both the assessors to help us identify those buildings and the building owners to start collecting data. We need to know what's out there. We need to know what their energy efficiency profile looks like. And then we will establish for those tier 1 some expectations around energy efficiency efforts that could be implemented that are clearly tied to creating the kinds of outcomes that you want commensurate with the investment. We're not going to require people to throw money at energy efficiency that doesn't pay them off in the long-term operation of those buildings. So that's one of the criteria that we're going to look at. For tier 2 buildings, that is the smaller buildings, the 20,000 to 35,000 size buildings, we are going to require them to help us with data collection. Again, we need to know what's out there. We need to know what the energy profile is. And we are directing ODO to look at an advisory council over time to see if it would be appropriate to implement a building performance standard program for those smaller buildings as well. That is not mandated in the legislation at this point. The fourth big effort we made was to look at state agencies. If we're going to look at other commercial buildings, if we're going to look at new residential buildings, we want to make sure that we are taking care of our own. So we have charged DAS, the Department of Administrative Services, for really working with state agencies on energy efficiency upgrades. DAS is required to look at any significant remodels or new construction to help those agencies figure out how they can do that in the most energy efficient way, or to help them design buildings that will reduce our carbon footprint. And then the fifth, but in some ways the most important initiative that I wanted to mention here today is that we asked Odo to put together a single resource program. That is, I would call it a navigation program. And this, if it reflects back on my description of the federal money that we saw coming in at the time when we were working all of this, we knew that we didn't have to worry about paying for heat pumps as much now, although there's still some heat pump customers who can benefit from state support. But what we also understood is that getting federal money is complicated, overwhelming, difficult for people. So we asked Odo to establish a single entry point so that what we hope to develop is a program where, in partnership with other entities across the state, we'll have a place where families or small businesses can come in, can get help evaluating what their energy needs might be, can understand the federal programs that might be available to them, and can, through this whole process, make good choices that are cost effective and make sense for their families or for their businesses. We want to make sure, and I'm sure you all agree with this, that we get our full share of the federal money that is coming this way. We want to pepper Oregon with everything that we can get out of the IRA. We want to complement that federal work with anything that's needed from the state. And we want to make sure that at the end of a few years, when we've cycled through that federal money, that we have Oregon families and Oregon homeowners and Oregon small businesses really with the best energy efficiency options, the best appliances, and really ready for what we know continues to happen, which is a climate that puts more and more pressure on our ability to sustain changing temperatures, changing conditions, ice storms, wildfires, and the host of issues that we know are coming our way. So in brief, that's the work that we did. Again, 2 years ago. What do we have on this front coming up? Well, I think one of the things we're certainly going to do, and I was reminded of this as I was reviewing what it was that we'd done for presentation today, and that is we have a lot of follow-up to do. We need to work with Odo to see how all of the programs that we've assigned to them are rolling out. We're going to want to follow DCBS and the energy efficiency mandates that we put into place there to see how those are being received and to see how they are actually translating into reduced emissions. We're going to want to follow up with that question around materials to see if there's an initiative there that we should take on, not tomorrow, not next session, but certainly over a period of time. We are going to continue to look at what's happening to Oregonians and making sure that we are stepping up for them in the best ways possible. I started this work. I'll just close on this comment. When I ran for office in 2016, I talked about climate change as being my first priority, and certainly it was, and it is. And I wouldn't talk about the question of adaptation because I felt like when we talked about adaptation, that was a suggestion that we were giving in to the idea of climate change. But what I understand now is that we are in the midst of circumstances that are clearly unrolling, and we have no choice but to also not to abandon in any way our mitigation efforts, but to also look at adaptation strategies and to try to figure out how we're going to keep communities whole as conditions continue to change. Many of our strategies in the building front do both things. I would argue that the electric heat pumps, while they're keeping people cool in the summer and warm in the winter and helping them to sustain increasing energy costs, are certainly also at the same time, because they are the most energy efficient item on the market, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the best when we can do both things, but we're going to have to do both things.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. It's really been great to hear about all the work that you have done and are doing in championing. I'll open the floor in case there's someone who wants to ask a question or make a comment.
And I would again note there are lots of people on this call who sat through many of those meetings, maybe all of them, and probably have many things to add that fell off my radar. I would welcome their comments.
Not seeing any hands. Oh, Director Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. I just wanted to amplify and thank you for your comments on adaptation. That was something I'm actually going to bring up later in the meeting when we get to our look ahead and what we should be focused on in the future. I think it's a really important concept that we have not really elevated to until now. And so thank you for kicking that off. I'll come back around again with that same comment later.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Commissioner Apter.
Thank you so much, Rep. Marsh. That was a really insightful walk back in time, even before the task force process that many of us were involved in. I just wanted to underscore, I mean, first, just the sheer amount of work and time that you and Senator Lieber and your colleagues chairing the task force put into the policy development and consideration and all of the opportunities for public input. That is no small feat. And I know it cannot always be replicated, but I do think it is a really strong example of how we can bring folks together to identify meaningful policy solutions that can earn broad support and get across the finish line. So it's just wonderful to be excuse me, on the other side of that in implementation phase. And just would love to think about, future opportunities, whether it's at that scale of the task force level or, right sizing it for a given need. But to replicate that, I think it was very exciting to be a part of, and all the more exciting to be seeing those policies become realized. I also wanted to maybe build on the previous comment that I think the policy outcomes from the task force are very much a shining example of how the state can think about both climate mitigation and emissions reductions and resilience at the same time. Buildings are a perfect example of that nexus in terms of both their contribution to our emissions, but also the role that they serve in protecting people and families from climate impacts and climate pollution. But I think that really, applies kind of across sectors. So really thinking about as the state moves forward with, implementing the policies and the roadmap to 2030 and beyond, how we can think creatively about policy solutions that both support Oregon in achieving our climate targets, but also be proactive and thoughtful about protecting communities from the impacts we're already experiencing it that we know will continue to worsen. So the last thing, and I think we get to our later agenda item around agency budgets, but definitely curious to have and interested to have conversation around to your point, Rep. Marsh, how implementation is going, but also what else is needed to make sure that we stay on track. I think the one-stop shop and community navigator for Odo to help, make sure that these incentives for households and consumers are as accessible as possible is a really incredible start. And, you know, hopefully we'll have more funding coming down the pike from CPRG. And there was just a big announcement around the IRA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that includes incentives for building efficiency and electrification. So I think also say the need in terms of making these incentives accessible by the folks who we hope will benefit from them will be only continue to grow. So just thinking about what those, how we can best support our agencies in continuing to do the great work they're doing and expand on it through providing the resources and staffing that will help them. Excited to dig in there.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you again for presenting to us. Thank you for all the incredible work you do for your constituents in the state of Oregon. It's really great to hear more about all the incredible things that are being accomplished through your efforts. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's delightful to be here with all of you. I just keep looking around this room at all the experts and the people that I email on a weekly basis. And I want to thank you for your contributions all over the place.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Where are we going next? We are now going to hear from some of the agencies that are involved in this kind of work. Director Stolfi and Director Bell are joining us from the Department of Consumer and Business Services and Department of Housing and Community Services. So welcome. You are two of our newer agency additions to the commission. And we wanted to try and get to know some of the new agencies that are working on climate action in Oregon. So with that, I am happy to turn things over to Director Stolfi, if you want to get us started, and then over to Director Bell.
Be happy to. Good afternoon, Commission. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. My name is Andrew Stolfi. I'm the Director of the state's Department of Consumer and Business Services, DCBS. I'm also the State Insurance Commissioner. I've got a short presentation. I've got some slides, which I will kind of help guide it through. Really just going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, kind of introduce our large, multifaceted agency to this group and really hone in on three areas: our insurance related work, our building codes work, which you've already heard a lot about, so I'll be really short on that, as well as the worker safety and health rules and enforcement activities that we do. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is just an overview of who we are. So you can see there's a lot of different parts to our agency. We are the state's largest consumer and worker protection agency, have about 1,000 staff members and offices around the state, responsible for a lot of things, from workers' compensation to insurance supervision. Again, I'm really just going to focus on three areas. So Oregon OSHA. So that's the state's workplace safety and health division. We're one of about 22 states that have a state OSHA program. Washington and California have state programs as well. So we put out rules and regulations around worker safety, and I'll talk about two of them in a few minutes here. We also have our building codes division. I'm really happy to be joined by Alana Cox. She's here today to answer any questions that any of you have. It's a very technical, complex area that she does an amazing job leading. But that work is pretty complex, as I said. We've got 7 different codes that we're responsible for. So we are unique, Oregon, in a lot of ways. We do have a single statewide code. 7 codes, actually. Each code has its own governor-appointed, Senate-confirmed board. We do have a specific energy board that's responsible for evaluating and approving state building code standards and rules relating to energy efficiency and other related areas. All of those codes are updated every 3 years, have to be agreed to by the board and by us. And we are unique in that we're one of the only states that has a single statewide code. Cities and counties then are responsible for helping to implement that, review plans, et cetera. But we call it a mini maxi code because the code can't be changed by any city or county across the state. So it helps really promote uniformity and consistency, predictability across the state. And last, our Division of Financial Regulation, that's the state's financial sector supervisor, and specifically where the insurance supervisory function sits. And if you turn to the next page, that's where I'll start and just share a couple things about the work we do as insurance regulators. The first is we work very closely with all of our state partners, and specific, I think this group would be interested in the wildfire resilience activities. So I got to travel the state last year. I'm going to do it again this year with our friends at the Department of Forestry and the State Fire Marshal's office, talking about the state wildfire risk map and insurance implications of that. We also been pretty active on the legislative front, and Representative Marsh has been an amazing partner and advocate when it comes to wildfire-related insurance issues. Last year, we did introduce Senate Bill 82, which had some consumer protections and reforms. I'll mention it had a couple elements too. I'd just point out to this group. One's around consumer disclosure. So you've probably seen in high wildfire risk areas, people get a notice that their insurance policy is not being renewed, their premiums are going up. Unfortunately, there's not usually a lot of information and explanation around that. So starting this year, because of our bill, insurance companies have to give property-specific reasons for those decisions. And the purpose there is to let that property owner know exactly why an insurance company might not be renewing, might be raising rates due to wildfire issues, and then give them some information about things they can do to mitigate and respond to those risks and make their property more insurable. And the second thing is, property owners, the state are investing a lot of money, time and resources into property and community level mitigation activities. We think those should be given credit by insurance companies. So this law requires those companies in their underwriting and rating plans. So they're, the things that govern the decisions they make on whether to issue, renew, and about rates. So they have to reflect how that insurer addresses or considers wildfire risk mitigation actions, such as home hardening, defensible space, and community risk reduction. And the last thing on that is consumer education. We spend a lot of time educating and empowering consumers on what they can do to help maybe make their property more insurable, or if they get a notice from their insurance company, respond to that. The next is around insurer solvency and market participation. One of our primary responsibilities is to make sure that insurance companies remain solvent so that they can pay claims when they come due. One, I think, interesting new thing that we're doing around that, we participated along with California and Washington, conducting a first ever climate risk stress test of insurer investments. So stress testing is a common thing that financial institutions around have been doing for decades. This is the first time that there was a climate-related stress test. There's a report online. It's called The Hidden Cost of Delaying Climate Action for West Coast Insurance Markets. We found that companies that do not have effective long-term plans in place would face higher costs if there was a transition shock from a quick move away from fossil fuel-related assets. And we placed the potential losses in the $7 to $40 billion range just in corporate bonds, just in our 3 states. So significant potential impacts. And we're going to use that information in those discussions we have in our review of financial solvency with our companies to make sure that they're evaluating and planning and taking that into account. And the last thing I'll mention on this, I'm really proud of the work we've done as a state in really leading the nation when it comes to climate resiliency. The NAIC is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. It's a group composed of all the insurance commissioners across the country. We get together to form groups and develop model rules and laws. We've been leading the risk and resiliency work there for a number of years, including some task forces and work streams. I was fortunate to lead a group that 2 years ago updated our climate risk reporting requirements to adopt the TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. You're probably all familiar with. It's kind of the international standard for climate risk reporting. So we adopted that and put that into place for the insurance sector, leading all the financial sectors in doing that. You know, the SEC is having some issues doing that for the broader sector, but that's been in place. We started getting those reports last year. About 1,400 companies last year reported on that. There's 22 states that participate, and we cover almost 90% of the insurance market. So really happy about that. And real quick, that last point, we even adopted a national climate resiliency strategy, has a whole number of points that we're going to then pursue as the country's insurance regulators around data collection, solvency tools, et cetera. So next slide, please. You know, I got to wrap up in a second. So on this one, this is our Building Codes Division actions. Representative Marsh did a great job talking about a lot of these things. I just stress that, you know, we were the first in the country to adopt state efficiency codes. We continue to be a leader in this area. There's a lot of ongoing and future work. You could see there the EV and solar ready provisions, the 60% reduction work. We're ahead of schedule, on or ahead of schedule in meeting all of those targets. And I'll point out, and Alana and I can answer any questions. We're doing a study this year on the carbon impact of building materials, looking at the total effects of a product from how it's manufactured, transported, installed, disposed of. We're going to submit a report to the legislature on embodied carbon by the end of the year. Happy to come back and talk about that. And then the next slide, there's a couple slides here, but just to say really quickly on worker safety and health and our OSHA program, we've put into place 2 rules. So we were developing these after the heat dome event. Governor Brown asked us to immediately put those into place. So in the summer of 21, we did temporary rules, followed that up in 22 with permanent rules. One is about preventing heat-related illness. It applies importantly indoors and outdoors, starts when the heat index is at 80, has more protection when the heat index goes over to 90. If you go to the next slide, please, this just talks about some of the requirements. These are a lot of these common sense about providing shade for people to rest, water, to have advanced planning. Very importantly, in a lot of our rules, employee training is very, very important. That has to be documented so that can be demonstrated to us. And then when the heat index goes up over 90, there's additional protections that go into place, a communication system. One of the most significant is this work rest schedule. I'll just say that employers are given flexibility to choose from among a number of options, but it requires a progressive amount of time off to cool down the hotter it gets. The model rule schedule that we have would call for breaks of 40 minutes per hour when the temperature is over 105. And then the next slide, the last thing, and I'm done, wildfire smoke rule. Again, when we see high heat, we often see wildfire smoke. So we thought it was important to have both these rules in place. It's tied to the AQI. Requirements start when that's at or above 101. And the next slide is my last one. And this just has, again, some of the aspects of it around assessment, information, training for employees. And you can see there the 3 requirements, we call them respirators. So for N95s, when the AQI is between 101 and 250, they have to be made available for employees. When it gets over 250, an employer has to ensure that employees are wearing them, but there doesn't have to be this medical fit testing done. But the AQI is over 500. Employees not only have to wear them, but there has to be this advanced fit testing, medical testing stuff. So, excuse me, there's a lot more I could say about all of these things. Just asked to give a really quick overview about the different areas we're involved. Alana and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Solfi. That's amazing. What a great breadth of work, all connected to climate action. And I really appreciate that. Any questions? I've got all sorts of ideas about follow-on topics that we'll have to put on your agenda for our future meetings. I don't see any other comments, questions. Director Bell, can you talk to us about the Department of Housing and Community Services and how you intersect with?
Happy to. Let me just confirm that my audio is coming through clearly.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, no slides today. Let me just start by just formally introducing myself, Andrea Bell, she, her pronouns. I'm your Executive Director for Oregon Housing and Community Services. I candidly am quite excited to be in virtual community with you today as part of our collective work in this conversation. So I just appreciate you, Chair McDonald, and the Commission for making some time. I know a lot of folks have been hard at work on climate action, not in the abstract, but in a really real, measurable way for progress for the people that we serve. So I just want to acknowledge everybody's hard work and care to this. Just by way of orientation, again, this is 10 minutes. So I'm going to give you a sort of a quick overview, and then my hope and expectation is as we're doing this work together that we could have a much more holistic view and approach as we think about the relationship between climate action and housing and the quality of life for the people that we serve. As the state of Oregon's housing agency, in the most fundamental way, our job is to make everyday life a little bit easier for folks from a housing perspective. So we do that through the entire continuum, everything from preventing and ending homelessness, as I think as a lot of people know in all of our communities are contending with the realities of that issues and a lot of reasons why it manifests. But a big piece of our job is one, preventing it, and then when those instances occur, ensuring that we have a strong safety net to be able to mitigate those situations with the local context in mind. The building and preserving of affordable housing over the last few years, the state of Oregon, in partnership with so many folks, we've been able to build more than 26,000 units of affordable housing. That's more than the state has ever been built. Now, I think by no stretch of the imagination is that enough. I think, in fact, we need to continue to set the bar high for that. But I think we have, from a housing perspective, been able to do what Oregon does best, which is really show up for the people that we serve, untethered by sort of the limitations by what we think government can do, which is an exciting part of our future. And then home ownership, which is, I think, is directly tied to our climate action work, but knowing that particularly in this economy, there are a lot of folks in which it is feeling bleak to pursue home ownership. But we also know that that has a big piece of and is directly tied to quality of life improvement as well. A bigger piece, but also newer piece of the agency's work as part of our expansion has also been around disaster recovery. So this was really birthed and built out of the context of the 2020 wildfires. But really, I think over the last couple of years, under the conditioned circumstances of concurrent crisis, I think what our housing agency has really seen a need for, which is a team of really sufficient experts that can expand and contract when there are different types of crises that can hit our state to be able to respond. So really, when you think about and sort of drive by areas in your neighborhood where you see just dirt and then you continue to see affordable housing or home ownership built, our hope is that that our resources, our hands have touched it in some way. I think as we think about the roadmap to 2030, what I would just say is we are doing this work in the context of a couple of things, which is one, there is a direct tie between economic mobility and social mobility. And as we think about climate action, we also know that climate action is directly tied to a few things that I think sometimes often get missed, which is really thinking about climate change and clean energy efficiency, but also thinking about clean transit, sustainable housing, and thinking about jobs as well. So whenever we are sort of pursuing our policy implementation and actions when it comes to climate actions in the context of housing, it's always housing. And so we know that we need more affordable housing, But part of where we see an important mandate for us, and it's exciting, and it's certainly a big responsibility, as I know for all of you have your own respective big responsibilities in this. We also know that this is about not only the economy of scales as a state, but the economy of Oregon households. Most of us know too many people or know somebody in our life who is going to sleep every day or waking up every single morning stressed out about whether they're going to be able to afford rent, whether they're going to be able to pay bills. And a big piece of that, I think, as we look at the data and we continue to really contend with the data and glean from it, we know that many of those households are experiencing a cacophony of burden. So it's not just rent burden, it's also rent burden and energy burden and water burden. That is important and probably not surprising for most of you, but that layers into a cacophony of burden for people, which makes it really, really hard. So we've got too many Oregonians that are either paying too much of a burden for rent to live close to work, or living really, really far away from work in order to pay for affordable housing. We've got a lot of families that are having to move multiple times throughout the year just to find affordable housing. So in the context of by which we do our work, we're very much looking about this from the built environment, thinking about really important aspects of clean water and water infrastructure, because this is about the people that we serve, not only just building housing as part of that. So as we think about the roadmap to 2030 and thinking about all of those pieces of climate change and equity and economic growth, I think a big piece for us is to also make sure that we are not patting ourselves on the back and calling it a success by only looking at the number of people who are served. We're also looking at who is being served. And to be very specific about that, I think we're also interested in making sure that the benefits of state and federal resources are really making it into rural communities in the context by which they need these resources, Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities. I think if we look across all of our respective work, I think we would probably see a number of themes that we need to contend with, and a number of those themes are disparities. And so we want to do more than just point to the problem and continue to point it out. But I think we collectively as a commission and individually as an agency want to summons our best selves to hold ourselves accountable to real progress that all of our communities, particularly those that are disparately impacted, are benefiting from. So in the context of the work that the agency does, maybe I'll just highlight a few things. So first is maybe our energy related programs. So the low income home energy assistance program, lovingly known as LIHEAP, and then our energy assistance program. These are some of the critical programs, sort of bread and butter programs that can continue to serve and really alleviate financial pressure for households. Now, certainly over the last couple of years, we have seen burden increase, therefore making these programs even more relied upon. As we think about from 2022 to 2023, we've seen within LIHEAP, over 57,000 households that have been served with OEAP, our energy assistance program, in that same calendar year. We've seen more than 10,000 households have served. And I think in this economy and in this market, we need more of that. Simply put, people need more relief. We need more of that. And again, I think as we look at these programs, we want to continue to really look at the disaggregation of that data to see who is served with that. Lifting up our weatherization program. Now, I think anybody under the sound of my voice who is less familiar with weatherization, but I imagine that many of you are, as we think about households that are getting by every day, and you think about windows that don't close all the way or other cracks in the house, that has a burden, that creates a real burden for households. And that weatherization program, which is facilitated through our community action agency partners, provides really critical problem solving things like sealing drafts and insulation and improving heating systems, which we heard a little bit about as well. So I feel like in many ways, those are some of the programs that people don't often think about when they think about a housing agency. But these are the things that I think many of people of Oregon across the state really rely on as well. And then the last thing I will mention here very quickly is our multifamily energy program. So this is a partnership with our utility partners really to improve the efficacy of energy efficiency in multifamily housing. So when we think about energy saving upgrades and sustainable living, but then also some of the other components through design assistance and cash incentives. These are some of the real attributes that I think really help us move the dial in that. Now, I think for the bulk of our work, which is really building in affordable housing, so as we look at current sessions or more recent sessions and sessions that have passed us, you continue to see an uptick in the building of affordable housing. That's a really important thing to know, because that is essentially where our values come through in policy action. And within that, that is where you'll see really critical attributes around climate actions, around energy efficiency, because a big piece of it is we want to make sure that our climate action is not only specific to those programs that scream climate action, but all of the other resources that goes into what we build and how we build it as well. And then just for sort of a broader connection for this commission's awareness, as we think about the eviction prevention programs, as we think affordable rental housing and home ownership assistance, disaster recovery, every single facet of that work in some way directly or indirectly touches our climate action work. And then the last couple things that I would just continue to leave you with, we're excited about, I think, our role and responsibility in advancing some of the values that are coming through in that roadmap to 2030. I think a big piece of how we are continuing to really be relentless in pursuit of what is needed from a housing perspective is also just continuing to recognize that I think between the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other really major federal investments, we see that we have hopefully not a last in a generation, but certainly it is creating a new way, in a way that we haven't really seen substantially before, to take some really big swings on climate action. And I think one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is the ability to also think about where there are opportunities for job creation in that. We're coming out of the pandemic where economies are at varying rates to rebound from it. And even though it takes a little while to build affordable housing, I think the important thing to know is even before we build the housing, we get the jobs, which I think is really important. And so I think a lot of the job creation, we're seeing a lot more climate focused jobs, which I think has the propensity to really continue and facilitate that action as well. So that's just a brief overview of the agency. I think there's an immense of opportunity beyond what I mentioned here, I think, for us to really partner. And my hope and expectation for our work is that we can continue to have as holistic of a view as possible, that we can use both the IRA and other federal resources to think about the interconnectedness of transportation and economy and infrastructure. And I think, of course, within all of those technical and exciting things, that we don't lose sight of the fact that this is about the people that we serve and making sure that everything is going back to and informed by the people that we serve from an equitable standpoint as well. So I'm happy to yield for a moment. I think we've got some folks from our team on to take if there's initial questions, and then we'll be following up with some reading material as if people didn't have enough reading material as well. So I'll yield for the moment.
Thank you, Director Bell. It's
of course
fascinating to hear about your work, both of your agencies. When we developed the kind of technical document that supported the development of the roadmap, we had really wanted to do a stronger job than we were able to evaluate equity and to start to think about how to inform some of the policy choices and design programs that are equitable. So I see a lot of opportunity to work with your agency on thinking that through the next time we update the roadmap, and as we start to pull out some of the activities and think about how do we design programs that are going to do a better job of reaching out to the people that need the most help. So really appreciate those efforts. Any questions or comments? Well, again, you both, we could have spent the whole meeting just learning more about the great work you're both doing, but we do really appreciate having you both on the commission and look forward to finding ways to collaborate and to support the good work that your agencies are leading. So thank you. We're going to turn things over to Nicole Singh, who's with us with DEQ, and she's going to walk us through the rulemaking that the department just kicked off to reestablish the climate mitigation program.
Sure. Thank you,
Excuse me,
Chair
Climate
McDonald.
Protection Program.
Thank you, Chair McDonald and Commissioners. I see the slides up in front of us, and I'm going to talk today about the Climate Protection Program 2024. So we're going to go to the next slide. Before I dive into today's presentation, I know with the time that we have today, there are a couple of things that, I would like to focus on. I think I've been asked to focus on. One of those is really just, why are we having a Climate Protection Program 2024 rulemaking, and really the process that DEQ has developed to move us forward as part of this rulemaking. I'm not going to actually spend much time today talking about like the design of the Climate Protection Program, how it works, how regulation works, all those kinds of details. Of course, if folks are interested in any of that, there's a lot of resources on our website, but I'm here, the rest of the Office of GHG programs and the climate policy team is available for questions. So I'm just putting that out there. As folks have more questions, we're always happy to answer those. But, why are we, the Climate Protection Program 2024 update is the Climate Protection Program 2024 rulemaking. And so, why are we having this rulemaking? And I'm sure folks on this call are aware of the fact that essentially there was a court ruling, the U.S. Court of Appeals in December of 2023 invalidated what was the Climate Protection Program rules and what was the Climate Protection Program. And so our primary reason for moving forward here at DEQ with a CPP 2024 rulemaking is we do want to reestablish a climate program in place of the CPP. And again, we want to go forward and do this because of the invalidation of the rules. And I should be clear, if folks are not aware, what the Court of Appeals decided was that there was a procedural error in our notification processes, and that procedural error is what led to the invalidation of the total Climate Protection Program. So I'm sure folks are aware there's many other things that were raised in the petitions that led to this decision, but all those other kinds of questions, they have nothing to do with the actual ruling by the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals basically just made this ruling focused on the invalidation, just on this procedural error. Obviously for DEQ, one of the things that we want to do is in the role that we play here, we want to continue to provide certainty and clarity on Oregon's climate policy. Many of the regulated entities in the Climate Protection Program, so again, these are our natural gas utilities, these are liquid fuels and propane suppliers, these are, large industrial stationary sources. These regulated entities have been, over the last year and a half, 2 years, they have been already working on how they were going to comply with the Climate Protection Program. And the Climate Protection Program, it did establish mandatory emission limits that declined over time. So our regulated entities have been already working on meeting the requirements of the program. And, essentially we want to do as much as we can to continue to see that behavior happen. So providing that certainty and clarity on Oregon's climate policy is very critical. And it's part of the reason that we want to move forward with, a brisk but a deliberate CPP 2024 rulemaking. And I think more generally, everything that so many of you all have been working on, and commissioners, is, this doesn't just apply to the regulated entities, right? We're all businesses, consumers, all of us are folks who use fossil fuels. More importantly, I think as we developed the Climate Protection Program, so many folks' lives are being touched by climate change. And it's definitely a topic and a discussion point where people all across the state have engaged and have provided their expertise and have provided comment. So again, we want to provide that certainty and clarity to regulated entities, but we want to provide that certainty and clarity to again, the businesses, consumers, stakeholders, advocates, all of us who, you know, live, work, and call Oregon home. Next slide, please. I don't have to show this, but again, I think this commission knows, you know, why CPP 2024 rulemaking, you know, obviously at the time, the Oregon Global Warming Commission, everything we've talked about, the roadmap, it really highlighted the importance of programs like the Climate Protection Program, not in isolation. Obviously, the Climate Protection Program is supported by all these other state programs across DEQ and other agencies that are helping us to transition in the clean energy economy. But, you know, the program itself did play an important role in, you know, reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions and also these kind of future forecasts for GHG emissions in the state. I'll go to the next slide. I did want to talk very briefly on, you know, how we got here, how we got to the Climate Protection Program, you know, how we got to the original Climate Protection Program, where we are now and where we hope to go with the CPP 2024 rulemaking. You know, at the time, I think this was very unique for DEQ, our agency, when we thought about developing the Climate Protection Program, which again is a program that's developed within our current regulatory authority. So the program is developed and it will continue to be developed with the authority that's invested to our Environmental Quality Commission. But that program, we did almost an 18-month, 20-month development process. We had what we call 2 phases to the program's development. One of those phases is our quote unquote official rulemaking process, and our official rulemaking process, which is what we are also doing now again in 2024. Our official rulemaking process really took place over the entire 2021 calendar year. It started in January and we basically wrapped it up in terms of the EQC's decision to adopt the program late in 2021. But prior to the rulemaking process, we had an entire scoping session, and we had those scoping sessions included lots of technical workshops. It included town halls. I think we had something like 7, 8, 9 workshops, 3 or 4 town halls. At each of those meetings, there was hundreds of attendees, hundreds of folks giving us comments at those meetings and also providing written comments. You know, in addition to that kind of work, we did do some kind of modeling analysis to help support some of the program design options, some of the decisions that we were trying to make. And again, for us, I think at the time, unique for DEQ was not just modeling analysis around potential emission reductions and not just macroeconomic impacts, but also public health impacts and also an equity analysis, how we could design a program that would support equitable outcomes and focus on environmental justice communities. Once we finished that scoping session, I think one of the real big takeaways of that scoping session and all that work was really these kind of 3 foundational goals for the Climate Protection Program. One of those goals obviously was to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but to try to find ways to do that we also could, where possible, contain costs for businesses and consumers, but also most, maybe for us at the time, unique, focusing on ways in which the program could support equitable outcomes. So really looking for ways that we could create benefits for environmental justice communities and also ways in which we could, in whatever role that we could play, small part that we could play in the program, reducing any potential harm to environmental justice communities. So I'm going to go to the next slide, but I did want to just emphasize, you know, the amount of time it took for us to develop that. I just wanted to once again acknowledge the sheer volume of comments that we had received and the engagement we had received, again, from stakeholders, from regulated entities, from individual Oregonians. And I do think, again, for us as DEQ, one of the things that we took away from that process is, you know, for us, it was, I think, based on my understanding, is it was really one of the few times that we had so much new voices engaging on some of our programs. And those new voices, part of that, I think, was reflective of the fact that, you know, all agencies, all of us are learning ways in which we can remove obstacles and more voices can participate in our rulemaking and our regulatory activities. But I also just think the breadth of comments that we received was reflective, again, of the importance of climate change to so many folks across Oregon, the importance of how we're going to design it, how we're going to fight it, how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to respond to it. And like I said, hundreds of comments at every stage. And, you know, ultimately when we put out the notice, which is our way of like talking about the rules, we put that out, I think, in the late summer of 2021. I think at that time we received something like over 7,000 comments, which may not sound huge, but for us, I think for the agency, that was a huge amount of engagement that we weren't anticipating. So, where we were, the program did start in 2022. The first year of the program was really focused on our implementation steps. Those were things that were very specific to our regulated entities, specifically our covered fuel suppliers. So again, that's our natural gas utilities and our liquid fuels and propane suppliers. Another important step for us in 2022 was the establishment of our Equity Advisory Committee, who was a key partner in helping us focus the program outcomes on environmental justice and equity goals, but really very much focused on supporting what we call the community climate investments component of the program. Again, in 2023, I'll just flag, we were very much focused on implementation of the program. I think we really started to kick off what was our best available emissions reductions component of the program. So that was a site-specific approach to tackle additional, mostly industrial process emissions. And we had just started the process of, starting to do the implementation of the BEAR program. And we had also actually had selected a provisional CCI entity, which was going to help basically implement the CCI program. And we were close to having that finalized so that our covered fuel suppliers could contribute to the CCI program if they so wanted. And then we also made some minor program modifications in a rulemaking process at the end of 2023. And then, obviously if the program hadn't been invalidated, we would have had the last year of our first 3-year compliance period. So the program was designed to have 3-year compliance periods. So again, our regulated entities had not yet demonstrated compliance with the program, but the 3rd year of the program would have been 2024, and 2025 would have been the first year in which they had to demonstrate compliance. So I'm going to go to our next slide. So I just want to talk really briefly about the scope of the CPP 2024 rulemaking. I think one of the questions we get a lot, and one of the questions that we discussed a lot internally at DEQ, is some folks even my own colleagues have said to me, well, it's just a procedural notice error. So isn't that all that you're doing? Aren't you just fixing that error? Are you just having this rulemaking process to fix that error? And yes, obviously we need to have a rulemaking so we could reestablish the program. So when we think of the scope of the CPP rulemaking, we do want to reestablish a program to set limits on emissions from significant sources in Oregon. We do want to have enforceable and declining limits on the emissions from these fossil fuels beginning in 2025. And we do want to make sure that this CPP 2024 program is comparable in scope and emissions reductions as the original CPP program. We're not, as DEQ staff, intending to propose a major program redesign. As you just heard me walk through all the steps that we went through to develop the program for the 18 to 20 months. And we don't intend to, chuck out anything just because we've had this invalidation. But I think one thing we do know at DEQ is that we do need to make some adjustments to the program just for a 2025 program start. And we've already started working with our rulemaking advisory committee, and we're already getting feedback on how we might have to make adjustments for the 2025 program start. But I think more broadly, we're also open to hearing any new ideas around program design and implementation that we think could strengthen the program. I think a lot of this is driven by our experience the last 2 years implementing the program. And we're also, I'm going to say, obviously, it's also, I think, driven by the experience of our regulated entities in terms of complying with the program. Like, what are they seeing? What kinds of obstacles might be there? I think for us at DEQ, are we seeing the types of changes that we were hoping to see when we designed the program? And I think also this isn't just our regulated entities, our public, lots of stakeholders have insight and had experience with the program after the last 2 years. So again, we are open to hearing, recommendations for program design and implementation. But again, we want these recommendations to be strengthening the program. So I might just go to the next slide. So again, in terms of considering modifications that would further strengthen the program, this is just some of the things that might be suggested to us that would be examples of how we could strengthen the program. I think what's really important, and I think in our conversations, we just had a RAC meeting this month, is within this umbrella of keeping our comparable emissions and reductions scope and ambitions, are there opportunities for us to increase equitable outcomes? Are there ways in which we can bring more folks along in the clean energy transition? Are there ways that we could do a better job of identifying who are those environmental justice communities and what might be needed in infrastructure? I think also we might hear opportunities to further minimize costs, not just our regulated entities, but again, we're all users of these fuels, to businesses and the public. We've talked so much today about these huge changes that have occurred since we first were implementing this program first designing this program in 2020 and 2021. As I said, CPP was always designed to be complementary with other initiatives, but as we just heard with IRA, Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, there's so much federal investments and funding, not just through DEQ, but through other agencies and even through other entities across the state. So I think that's definitely top of mind for us, is how we can continue to leverage those future federal investments in ways that can make supporting the Climate Protection Program 2024 or implementing it easier. And I think the other thing that we're also looking at here might also generate more opportunities for improvements is other state programs right now that are occurring in climate mitigation. Again, since 2020, 2021, we have a program in Washington. California is making adjustments. I think for us, it's just, are there things that we can learn from those programs, even though our program has to be designed specifically for Oregon? But, are there things that we can learn from those programs about program design elements? And more broadly, are there benefits or considerations as other programs in other states in the region are, more actively addressing reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So I'm going to stop there. I think that's my last slide. I don't think I need to spend too much time on this just to keep us on schedule, but I think the next slide, which I'll just throw up there, is just basically our rulemaking schedule for the CPP 2024. We just kicked off our advisory committee meeting in April. I know folks here were either attending or on the advisory committee or listening. We actually did, for us, our first in-person, I think, advisory committee meeting in the agency since pre-pandemic. So we were actually invigorated to have an in-person advisory committee meeting. Again, all the advisory committee meetings the public can listen to those meetings, and we have public comment periods at all the advisory committee meetings. Again, this is a brisk timeline because we think it's important to get the program reestablished, but it's also very representative of the rulemaking schedules that we have for most rulemakings. And again, we are deploying all the work that was done when we first developed the Climate Protection Program back in 2021. We are hoping to publish the notice in late July, and obviously we'll be making sure that as an agency that we think that we are complying with all our procedural requirements. And then our expectation as DEQ is to present a rule to our Environmental Quality Commission in November of 2024. I think that's it.
Nicole, thank you so much for your presentation. One of the things that did come out of the work that we did as part of developing the roadmap was just how important existing programs like the CPP were to putting us on track to meet and exceed our goals. And so our first recommendation in that roadmap was to really track implementation and make sure that these programs, such as the CPP, were being implemented in a really good and aggressive way. So appreciate that that the department has picked up the ball and is going back through this rulemaking so we can get the program back in place. Are there any questions for Nicole? Comments? Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole, for the presentation and all the updates and all of the work that you and the greenhouse gas emissions team have been doing at DEQ. I just want to like put a fine point on the comment that you just shared, Kathy, especially for newer commissioners or folks who are listening in that weren't engaged in the roadmap to 2030 or aren't thinking about the findings of the Tigger report. I think important to emphasize the need to ensure strong implementation of existing programs, but specifically this program, which just to, I think it bears repeating, is according to our commission's own report, responsible for achieving roughly half of our state's projected emissions reductions by 2035. So I think roughly 45% of those targeted 45% emissions reductions are or would have been the result of the climate protection program. So just really want to emphasize that. And then also in thinking about our recommendations and strategies to support an equitable transition to clean energy and think about communities that have been historically impacted and continue to be impacted by climate impacts and climate pollution. The CPP is also just so historic in terms of how the community climate investment piece of the program enables just truly historic investments in environmental justice in other communities in Oregon. There's really no other, dedicated funding stream of its kind in the state. And would just emphasize as well, right, where if DEQ is hopefully able to stay on track, right, with the timeline that's been proposed, as we see here, get the rules reinstated by 2025, that is, the middle of the decisive decade for climate action, right, and also 25 years from 2050 when we're, hopefully going to be moving and accelerating progress toward net zero. So just a lot of really important markers, I think, that are kind of hanging in the background in this process that I hope is helpful to helpful context for newer folks newer to the process or the program.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Apter. Really, really important points. Any last question for Nicole? Well, thank you again for joining us today and going over this important work. We'll be interested in hearing how it's proceeding as it continues. So with that, I think we are ready to take a break. I think we scheduled 15 minutes. Let me just look and see where we are. We scheduled 10 minutes. Let's try and come back at 3:05. Thank you. As people come back, if you would go ahead and turn your video on so I can see when the commissioners are back. Would appreciate it. Give folks just a few more minutes. For folks that are returning, if you could just go on your video briefly so I know when majority of us are back. Thank you. I'll reconvene the Oregon Climate Action Commission meeting and turn things over to Amy, who I want to just appreciate for some research she did between our last meeting and this meeting to try and pull together from agencies what are the opportunities that agencies are hosting to engage the public in helping gather input and set priorities for the next biennium. So I'll turn things over to Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you to all of the agencies that provided me with information on your budget processes and opportunities for engagement on relatively short notice. I really appreciate it. Before I go into the specifics on each of the agencies, I want to give just a brief overview of the budget process this year. The start of the 2025 to 2027 budget development began earlier than usual this year with coordination between agencies, the governor's office, the Department of Administrative Services, or DAS, and their chief financial office, or the CFO. And the aim was to understand potential legislative concepts and budget requests that are needed to address agency and programmatic needs in a way that would facilitate stronger coordination between agencies and the governor's office earlier in the budget process than it typically occurs. So there's a key deadline. All agency request budgets are due to the CFO, the Chief Financial Office, by August 30th of 2024. So I'm just going to provide a really brief overview of each of the agencies, not necessarily their budget processes, but where you can find more information about their budget processes and their policy option packages, and then opportunities for public engagement. So the Oregon Department of Agriculture will be working to finalize its agency request budget in coordination with DAS and the governor's office. And once that process has refined itself later this spring, the agency will schedule time with the Board of Agriculture to brief the board on the proposed budget. There will be time at the Board of Agriculture meeting for public comment and input on the budget. In addition, the agency will invite key stakeholders for a briefing. And the timing of all this is currently unknown, as ODA is still working through its budget process. The Oregon Department of Energy is also in the process of developing our policy option packages, or POPs, which are being developed based on needs identified by the agency and our stakeholder and community partners. We have a meeting scheduled for April 22nd to discuss our POPs with our Energy Advisory Work Group. And the public is welcome to attend the meeting. It's a virtual meeting, or they're welcome to attend virtually, but there won't be an opportunity for formal feedback or formal opportunity for feedback for the public at that time. So Odo also plans to hold a public meeting this summer to discuss the agency request budget with interested parties. And you can find out more information on our website, which is listed on the slide that you see right now. The Department of Environmental Quality presented to the Environmental Quality Commission in March on its agency request budget priorities, offering an early sense of the proposals and issues the agency is exploring as it develops its 25 to 27 legislative and budget agenda. DEQ is also engaging interested parties through all-comer meetings in which it briefs attendees on priorities and issues and seeks feedback. And the next all-comer meeting is scheduled for April 16th. DEQ's various programs and media divisions also hold standing stakeholder roundtables, and budget development is a reoccurring topic in those meetings. The agency's current process focuses on engagement with organizations that have an interest in DEQ's work. The slide deck from the March EQC briefing is the most current publicly available document that summarizes DEQ's budget priorities. DEQ and the EQC accept public comment on all matters at each meeting, and that can include policy or budget issues. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Department of Consumer and Business Services has public meetings to, or convened a public meeting to discuss the agency requested budget on April 4th, and has an upcoming meeting on May 16th. And there is information provided on those meetings on their website. The department also posts biennial budgets on its website, and the link on the slide will direct you to its current biennial budget in addition to past budgets. And DCBS is currently working on developing the 2025 to 27 agency request budget with the guidance of the agency's governor's policy advisor, as well as with the DAS chief financial office analyst. And DCBS has an email address for public engagement, so interested parties can contact the agency at the email that's listed on the slide. The Department of Land Conservation and Development, I'm sorry, I have a puppy in the background and he's being loud, so apologies if that's distracting. It's distracting to me, so hopefully it's not distracting to all of you. The link to the Department of Land Conservation and Development's 2025 to 2027 policy option proposal is available on the slide. DLCD held public meetings on March 22nd and April 2nd to discuss the agency's proposed policy option packages, and it's accepting written comments on its proposal through April 15th. The public can also offer written or oral feedback to the Land Conservation and Development Commission on April 25th at 11 a.m. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has all of its budget information is available through the link on the slide, which the agency expects to update frequently over the next 3 months. ODFW held a public meeting to discuss the agency requested budget on April 4th, and it has another meeting scheduled for May 16th. And I sure hope that that isn't a typo, because it's the same dates that I have listed for DCBS's meetings. So if that's the case, I will correct that error and notify all of you on the commission. ODFW staff will gather input at the public meetings and summarize it when presenting the final agency requested budget to the Fish and Wildlife Commission on June 14th. That meeting is scheduled to be convened in Klamath Falls, but there is a virtual option. And the commission will take public testimony, both in person and virtually, at that meeting. Commission agendas are posted at least 2 weeks in advance on the commission's website. Next slide, please. The Oregon Water Resources Department budget information can be found on the link on the slide. And there is a remote public meeting planned for May 7th from 9:30 to 11 a.m. And the link to that meeting will be available on the webpage listed on the slide. Business Oregon is still in early stages of its budget development process, and it has not yet landed on a list of POPs that it plans to take forward. The agency is encouraging interested parties to provide input as soon as possible, and Business Oregon is very interested to hear any policy ideas from the commission. And the public can always reach out to the agency through the Biz Oregon website, and the contact page is listed on the slide. And finally, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board provides a draft list of its POPs on the webpage that's linked on the slide. This is a draft list and it's subject to change pending feedback from the governor's office. There are several options to engage in OWEB's agency budget development. People can sign up to provide public comment at OWEB's April board meeting, or they can submit written comments in advance of the board meeting. And there are instructions for both options on OWEB's board meeting page. OWEB leadership meets regularly with conservation and agriculture organizations, and it will also be sharing its draft list of POPs at those meetings. And OWEB is happy to attend coalition meetings and share information about its draft POP list if any organizations would like to invite them to come speak. And people are always welcome to reach out to the director directly, and she will route any feedback or questions to OWEB's budget development team. Oh, and last but not least, I don't have this on the slide because this information came in shortly before the meeting, but the Oregon Health Authority is planning to hold community sharing sessions in July of 2024 through February of 2025. The agency anticipates its priorities to be informed by broad community engagement efforts in recent years to prepare the state health improvement plan. And that is the information I have on budget processes. I think you're on mute, Kathy.
Right, you are. I just wanted to add my thanks to all the agency staff that pulled the information and shared it with Amy so she could pull this together for us. I think the more that we can do to kind of encourage people and help people find ways to get engaged in budgeting and prioritizing climate action is an important role that this commission can play, and might pull in some interesting conversations across agencies as priorities get developed. So thank you, Amy, for pulling this together for us. And if other agencies have information that we just missed, we'll go ahead and try and keep a summarized list of all the information that we can find. Any questions for the directors that are here with us, representing some of these agencies? From the agency directors themselves about the process and what kinds of information would be helpful. Folks are welcome to raise their hand and let me know if you want to make a comment or ask a question. Okay, not seeing any. Oh, there we go. Commissioner Apter.
Waiting to see if anyone else wanted to chime in. And want to echo the appreciation. I know there's a lot of moving pieces, even with this new approach and process this year and trying to streamline things. It's a lot of work within each agency. So really appreciate Amy you pulling this all together, and also appreciate all the agencies that are working to provide opportunities for public input. I guess I had two questions. One is hopefully easy, maybe not, but sorry if I missed this, Amy, but where do we have information on ODOT's plans?
I did not receive any information from ODOT, and not all agencies have public processes for setting their budgets. And ODO is one of those agencies, so it's possible that ODOT does not have a public process for setting its budget priorities. I don't want to speak for the agency though.
Susan, is that something you can speak to?
Yes, and I do have, I believe there was some information sent forward. I can resend it so you've got it. I don't know when it arrived. That's okay. I don't know when it arrived. I received it just a little bit before this meeting, so it could have been right before. Not completely sure. So in terms of, actually, let me pull it up really quickly. So most of our investment decisions come through the statewide transportation improvement program, and we have a public process through the Oregon Transportation Commission there. So we actually have a relatively limited number of requests going through the POP process this year. So just wanted to say, in terms of our POPs, we're looking at some staffing for Interstate Bridge, some core program delivery in our public transportation division, some focus on some rural veterans healthcare transportation program resourcing, and then the agency, or we're all transitioning into this Real ID, and so we have some staffing to support that, along with teen driver education. So in terms of our agency budget, generally we kind of think of that as our investment portfolio of projects through the statewide transportation improvement plan. Again, that's the Oregon Transportation Commission. We also have our agency revised budget, and then our POPs this year are really focused on those relatively limited staffing positions. So hopefully that's enough information. Happy to answer anything else.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, and I will forward this along just to make sure you've got it as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Apter, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair McDonald. I was just, again, I mean, I do really appreciate and think it's so important for the public and, you know, affected stakeholders and communities to have input on state budgeting proposals and decisions. And I also recognize that we live in a budget constrained world in Oregon, especially. So I don't know if I'm still wrapping my head around maybe whether it's a question or a comment, but maybe we'll go with the latter for now. Just would welcome the chance for ongoing conversations with state agency directors and staff in terms of how you all are considering funding requests and prioritization, given, you know, we don't have all of the resources in the world. And I just recognize it's a balancing act between, you know, keeping up with inflation and rising costs, but also making sure we have continued funding for existing successful programs that benefit climate and communities and public health, that require that continued appropriation in order to keep, you know, the lights on and the doors open for folks, while also balancing, you know, future needs, right, new programs that we need to get established, and on top of all of that, like continued federal funding, right, and all the staff time and resources and capacity it takes to make sure Oregon has all it needs to fully leverage and maximize and to go after federal funding opportunities. Looking just at the CPRG, right, it's just a huge body of work that our state agencies are having to do on top of their already large workload. So I guess that is more of a comment and just putting a marker down for an appreciation for starting this conversation, and hope the commission can continue to serve as a venue for discussion around, you know, what the needs are, how agencies are thinking about balancing all of those competing priorities, and how we might help to maximize and inform those decisions and support agencies in getting the funding they need.
Yeah, Commissioner, after I appreciate that. It would be nice to be able to get a little better picture and kind of longer view of opportunities that are going to be in front of us. And then how does that, what kinds of additional flexibility does it give us to think about how to invest Oregon state dollars most effectively? Any other agency directors that want to make any comments about their budgets or?
I can chime in, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Brenda Bateman, Director of Department of Land Conservation and Development. So I might have missed this. I didn't know if there was just discussion. I can't remember if there was discussion here in this venue a moment ago about some of the instruction that agencies have been given to in crafting of their budgets, or what we can expect, trying to manage expectations moving forward. That agencies, you know, will be invited to or permitted to ask for new dollars for 25-27 up to the amount of about 1% of their current service level. So it's very small percentage wise for us. That doesn't mean we can't have big ideas, but probably we need to be very realistic into how where they'll actually land. So maybe figure about 1% of our current general fund budget is what we've been told. And along the way, we have been asked to highlight or make sure we've pulled out and underscored any ideas that are in the arena of resiliency, so that is an interest, and that's something that folks would like to hear about and see sort of what we're thinking there. And also, to your point just a few minutes ago, anything that can be grouped in the realm of leveraging federal dollars. So if we are part of a program or know of a program or a grant that will leverage, say, 1 to 2 or 1 to 4 federal dollars, we need to note that, because we certainly don't want to leave any money on the table.
Absolutely.
You mentioned a few minutes ago our upcoming meeting with our commission that will take place at the end of next week in Lebanon. We'll be meeting April 25 and 26 with them. And part of the discussion that we're going to have with them in that meeting is to get their input on how, process-wise, how they would like for us to prioritize. If we have a very tiny ask and very big ideas and lots of need, you know, what would they put at the top of the criteria list? Presumably, climate change and resiliency, housing production for us, of course, equity. And so we are trying to get some input from them, and would invite folks who are interested in chiming in to provide not only public comment for that time period for that meeting, but specifically around how should we, one, go about prioritizing when we have very little, probably, resources to secure as part of this process.
Thank you for the added context, Director Bateman. It's really helpful.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brenda, following up on that, very, very useful information. Presumably that, you know, let's say 1% net increase for really good ideas could be higher if you're looking at a cut somewhere else, right? I mean, there could be reductions, you know, a program that maybe is, you know, less crucial than this new program that you want to do. So, you know, where there was a, you know, a reduction elsewhere, that could be packaged together with an increase that could be above 1%, right?
That's correct. In fact, I think ideas that end up being revenue neutral because they've been paired with something else or because they've been creatively structured or maybe partnered with another agency, those are very well received and often, of course, are more successful if you can demonstrate savings or a greater efficiency in the process. That's good.
Great. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Senator Gembro. Other comments, questions?
I had a comment, Chair McDonald.
Yes.
That
Welcome.
1% guidance, 1% on general fund, I think that's across the board from the governor's office, not just on the agencies present here. And so that's just a little contextual FYI.
Thank you.
Funding constraints.
Chair McDonald, I would just add, I think, one of the things at ODA, we're running a little behind because of the transition. And so we're still working on our strategic plan and how to align that with our budget ask, knowing that we have a pretty small amount of money when you talk 1% of our general fund in this agency. And then some really key core programs that are important to Oregonians in terms of natural resource stewardship, water quality, and food safety and consumer protection. You quickly have very little in terms of things that are unobligated. And we're really concerned in assuring that we continue to hold the foundation, and we need to do some work like internally around our IT infrastructure and other things to bring it up to speed to be able to provide the services going forward that Oregonians expect on a crumbling infrastructure.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Acting Director Page.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to mention that due to the instructions Director Bateman mentioned, we've already taken some of the POPs off the list that is linked on this slide. And so our request is ever evolving, and we're consolidating and prioritizing to make sure we stay within the instructions.
Thank you. That's helpful. Other comments? Great. Thank you. Good to have this a lot of resources in one place and information that can hopefully help folks know how to engage in the process and try and make sure that important climate programs are being advanced. So thank you.
Chair McDonald,
Yes.
just real quickly, just wanted to note, I will take the information from these slides. I will add the information that I recently received from other agencies, and I'll compile it all into a single document that will be uploaded to the commission's webpage.
I appreciate that, Amy. Thank you very much. Great. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is really thinking about our meetings that are coming up and some changes to the meeting dates, but also then thinking about what are some of the priority topics that we want to make sure we are engaging in. After we settled on the dates for the meetings, we discovered that there's a mandatory director meeting with the governor on that overlapped with several of the dates that we had selected. So the May meeting was one of those, and given that we didn't have very much time, we just decided that we needed to cancel the May meeting. And then we're looking at some of the meetings that are further out and trying to look at how we might reschedule the meeting to make sure that some of the assignments that we have in front of us, that the commission will have enough meeting time to get together and dig into those. So this is our new schedule, and I think it is going to be a stable schedule. So we'll stick to this. And what I wanted to do is just do some brainstorming today about topics that people feel like are timely and important for the commission and to discuss and where appropriate to act on. I went back and kind of walked back through all the things that we identified as part of the developing the roadmap, and then looked back at the natural and working lands proposal, and then considered some of the assignments that we have on our plates in terms of things that we need to get done in the coming year. And so that was a good process for me to think about what we should be putting in front of the commission with the dates for the meeting kind of scheduled out in front of us, and some input on the agendas. We hope to do a better job of reaching out to agencies and to other invited guests earlier, so people can get it on their schedules, and we can really kind of plan our coming year or so out. So just wanted to open things up, and would love to hear from agency directors and commissioners, from our legislative members, what topics you'd like to make sure we get on our agenda for the coming year or so. I know we talked quite a bit about transportation being one of those topics that's going to be front and center in the next in the legislative session next year. So that's probably a broad topic area. There may be subcategories underneath that. So with that, I'll just open the floor up. Maybe we could take the slide down, and then we could just go ahead and people can raise their hand and brainstorm about topics. One that came up earlier today was resilience and equity, or the two kind of overlapping ideas. And I know the Oregon Health Authority was interested in getting that equity and resilience on the table, as well as Director Bateman. Senator, there we go. Senator Dembro.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I really appreciated the presentation early on that Colin did on the EPA climate reduction grant. And I wonder if it would be useful for us to consider a sort of standing agenda item on grant proposals, and maybe even more to the point, news about grant receipts, that the grants come through, just to kind of keep the commission abreast of what we're asking for and what we're getting. I just think that would be a kind of useful thing. Not anything you could plan for exactly the way that you can a topic, but having that as a standing agenda item, a potential agenda item, I think could be useful.
I think so too. That sounds a great idea. Director Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still trying to gather my ideas around this, but we've mentioned throughout the meeting earlier the concepts of resilience and equity and adaptation, and I'm wondering if, as we kick off some of our guest presentations and discussions throughout the rest of the year, if we might do some context setting and talk a little bit more about some of the landscape or systems wide approaches that we need to be considering as a state. I think Director Bell put it really well when she was talking about housing, and she was talking about the cost burden of transportation, where you put your houses compared to where you put your jobs, compared to where you put your schools, how you group things, and whether you even have to get in a car in order to get all of these things accomplished is going to be huge. And that's system wide, and that's where your multipliers and your amplifiers come from, right? I was looking back at your figure 7, I've lost it now, in your prep materials about the types of scenarios that really get your emissions driven down. And at the top of the list is, you know, higher urban residential density and reduced residential floor area. This is how you design your communities and where you put everything. And then the other piece is how you outfit those buildings. That's important too, but really the grand design, I think, is going to get us towards multiple goals faster, our climate goals, our equity goals. So I'm just wondering if, as we talk about the coming transportation plan and the energy strategy and the water strategy and all of these big strategies, if we can even put some bigger context around that and say, this needs to be integrated, and, you know, we need to take a broad view here and a more collaborative view and see what things we can accomplish simultaneously with efficient resources. And so I have no idea what that looks like, but I just wanted to put the big idea out there.
I like that. It's a great idea. You know, we have such a wealth of resources with all of the agency directors on the commission, and, you know, very few of the challenges that we're facing are single agency challenges. They touch on multiple agencies at the same time, and I think the more we can find ways to find those places of intersection and talk about issues from that broad perspective, the better decisions we'll make. So I'd love to work with you on thinking out how we might design something like that to kind of set some foundation.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Commissioner Apter?
Thank you. Well, Director Bateman, I really like that idea, and I think to build on what you were saying, Kathy, I just totally agree. I think one of the major benefits and opportunities that this commission has is to serve as a venue for that cross-agency and cross-issue collaboration and information sharing and thought partnership. And even, you know, if there's a conversation that starts here that then lends itself to, you know, a work group in a different arena, or, you know, supports it, and encourages conversations in between meetings, I think that's all helpful to our overall goal. And I think being mindful of what are those, especially those major policy areas that we know will continue to be at the forefront of the, you know, challenges and solutions that the state is working toward together, like housing and how that intersects with, you know, the 2025 transportation package. And then to Senator Dembro's point too, like, where are there federal funding opportunities that intersect that we can leverage to help drive down costs as we work towards these solutions. I think would love to apply that lens across the board as we're thinking about priority topics for agendas. And I think building off of what you were saying, Senator Dembro, I totally agree about having something standing as much as possible around federal funding. And it might make sense to have a longer agenda item at some point, you know, later this summer, or even like in August, which is the 2-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Like where are we as a state meeting the mark, right? What are the opportunities that we have successfully leveraged, and how can we replicate that in other areas? Where's there opportunity for, like, again, cross-agency collaboration, or better opportunities for public input as the state is determining kind of highest and best use of resources and applying and then implementing funding. So I'm just saying, in addition to having kind of a standing item, if that fits in, that maybe a longer conversation this summer around kind of the current federal funding landscape and what's on the horizon might be worthwhile. And then I was just before hearing Director Bateman and Senator Dembro's good suggestions, was just going to recommend that we not lose sight of the great kind of work plan that we have set out for ourselves in the roadmap. Thinking about, areas of continued implementation, whether it's achieving our 100% clean electricity goals, everything that it will take to successfully meet those mandates, thinking ahead to future policy opportunities. We just have such a great literal roadmap already in place. And so I think that can serve hopefully as a good kind of guiding document for us as we think about how to prioritize future agendas. And then, the last thing I'll say, sorry for taking up so much time. I also recognize that we have those dates, and right now we don't have, we're doing the brainstorm of what we would ideally like to talk about, but I think what's not reflected is that we already know some of the topics that we will need to have on the agenda, like the consumption-based emissions report that DEQ is leading on. I think the biennial report to the legislature will take up some time. So just trying to be thoughtful about what we're taking on and how those different ongoing processes will fit into upcoming meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a number of assignments that we have to make good on, so we'll get those included. And I did try and capture all those in the memo that I sent out before this meeting. So, other ideas that coming to mind for folks? One of the topics that I thought would be of interest, I haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, but I know the Power and Conservation Council is gearing up for their 9th power report or power plan. And I think they heard or they have developed an issues paper. That might be another topic that would be of interest to get on our agenda in an upcoming meeting. So we'll take more ideas and start to sketch something out, and certainly would welcome input from the folks that attend our meetings to provide after the meeting, and we'll start to get something sketched out and scheduled out so that we can get folks invited and presenting on the things that that we hope to hear about. Any other input? Okay, we'll go to public comment. Amy, can you let us know if folks have signed up to provide public comment?
I have not received any requests to provide public comment at this time. If any members of the public would like to provide comment, please raise your hand. I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, thanks to all of you for who presented today. With that, I will close the April 16th meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission and look forward to seeing you all in June.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.